Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. Why do liberals hate Israel? Why are they so hostile? Why do they lie about Israel? Our guest has written a fascinating book called American Intifada, Israel, the Gaza War, and the New Anti-Semitism. Historian Uri Kaufman has been with us before. He's written quite a few other books, but his latest one is dealing with this issue. He's also written 18 Days in October, the Yom Kippur War, and how it created the modern Middle East. Welcome back to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. You wrote a book about not only why liberals hate Israel, why they lie about it all the time. But this is not something new. This goes back, you go back to Jimmy Carter and you go back to Barack Obama and others. So this is not anything new that's unique to the Gaza war.
Unfortunately, what you're saying is true. I mean, but if you want to start with the Gaza war, right after the October 7 attack, Barack Obama tweeted that we have to face facts. There's unclean hands on both sides. And he wrote this on October the 23rd. So this is before Israeli troops even went into Gaza. So before they went in, he said, you know, there's unclean hands on both sides. Why the moral equivalence? He gave the answer because of what he termed the unbearable occupation. Well, guess what? There was no occupation. Israel had withdrawn from Gaza over 18 years before. So he basically just made it up. He basically came up with facts to fit his narrative. If you want to talk about Jimmy Carter, before we get into just his presidency, he wrote a book back in 2003 called Israel, Peace, Not Apartheid. There is a misstatement of fact on practically every single page. Among other things, he said that Israel attacked Jordan in the 67 war. That is blatantly false. Jordan attacked Israel. Israel begged Jordan to stay out of the war. He said that Israel only offered the Palestinians 83% of Judea and Samaria at Camp David. That's false. They offered them about closer to 96 or 97%. He had a mislabeled map, said things about many other things, all of it completely false. And so the obvious question is, why do they do this? Why do they make up facts when it comes to Israel?
You would expect liberals to be a little better, be more progressive when it comes to dealing with Israel, because you have people who are gay, people who are other minorities that if they went to Gaza, they went to Iran or any of these Arab countries, they would not live a very long, productive life. Yet they constantly ignore that and attack Israel. Why?
Well, first of all,
are
just
they
on
stupid?
that point, on that point, there was a demographer who was asked, what's the life expectancy of gay people in the Palestinian territories? He said, simple, until they're discovered. One definition for when the Israelis were bombing the tall buildings in preparation for the Gaza invasion, they said, well, what's a tall building? And someone said, any building tall enough to throw a gay person off of, at least what Hamas would do. And now here's another fun fact. The United States of America has not elected an openly gay male to the United States Senate as of today. There was one woman and then one woman who just defined herself as bisexual. Israel elected the first openly gay person to the Knesset, the rough equivalent of the U.S. Senate, way back in, are you ready for this? December of 1973. And he sat in the government with the ultra-Orthodox. He was accepted. Israel's one of the most liberal countries in the world. So, yeah, and then you look at the Arab world, and it's just, you'd think it would be a target for progressive fury. So why in the world are liberals so hostile to Israel? When it's Israel that shares the values and the Arabs who don't. So the best way to understand this is to engage in a thought experiment. So we all know what happened on October the 7th. Horrible attack, totally unprovoked, 1,200 people murdered, many women raped, thousands wounded, 251 hostages. It enjoyed universal support among the Palestinian people, according to every single opinion poll that was taken. Palestinians also regularly refer to Jews as apes and pigs. If you don't believe me, just go on Google, type in Jews, apes, and pigs, or Palestine, apes, and pigs. Scroll with your mouse, you'll see what I'm saying is true. One final fact. The Biden administration budgeted billions of dollars of aid to the Palestinians after the attack, not to Hamas, of course, to what they term the innocent civilians. Okay, let's assume every one of those facts is true. Let's just change one fact. Let's assume the attackers were not Palestinians. Let's assume they were Germans of another era, or I don't know, Russians of another era, or white South Africans. In other words, let's assume they were white people, not people of color, white people who say Jews are apes and pigs. Do you really think that Biden would have given them billions of dollars of aid? And now hold the thought. Let's carry this thought experiment all the way through. Let's assume that in this parallel universe, white supremacists, again, not Arab supremacists, but let's assume they murdered 1,200 black people and they raped black women. And then a Republican administration said, we're going to give billions of dollars of aid to the innocent civilians, the innocent white supremacists who say blacks are apes and pigs. First of all, it would never happen. And second of all, they'd be rioting in the streets if it did. So what's going on here? What's going on here is a classic textbook case of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological phenomenon that was identified in the last century. And it says that when people have deeply held beliefs and then facts appear that contradict the beliefs, people change the facts, not the beliefs. The highest, deepest, most important value for liberals today is fighting racism. And now you have this highest profile conflict that pits people of color, the Palestinians, against a perceived white group of privilege, the Jews. The liberals are backing the people of color because that's the way they're wired. The problem, of course, is the facts don't even remotely justify it. So they change the facts to fit the narrative.
So how do they get away with it constantly lying? Look at the New York Times and the distortions, and look at some of the other media where they get it all wrong, including the fact when Israel pulled out of Gaza, you can't even say they were occupying it, but yet they act as if they were the occupying power in Gaza who weren't there anymore. How do they get away with it?
It is a really good question. I'll even go one better. Not only do they get away with it, they win awards for doing it. Tom Friedman got famous, won the Pulitzer Prize, and became a journalistic superstar, writing things about Israel that were just patently false. So he got famous. People of my generation all remember this. There was a massacre in two Palestinian refugee camps called Sabra and Shatila way back in 1982. The massacre was perpetrated by a Lebanese militia. Tom Friedman, who was then a 29-year-old cub reporter, showed up, or 28-year-old, whatever he was, and he wrote that, number one, a Lebanese militia under Israeli command took part in it. Number two, Israeli soldiers could see what was happening in real time from the roof of a building. And number three, the Israelis knew the massacre was happening and let it go on. It turned out all three of those things were patently false. Now, that's called lousy reporting. And lousy reporting sometimes win the Pulitzer Prize, as it did for Tom Friedman. But here's where the story really goes dark. After it became clear that it was all completely false, because the Israelis had a commission of inquiry, the Kaufman Commission, and they gave an hour-by-hour description of what happened, Tom Friedman doubled down. He wrote his book called From Beirut to Jerusalem, repeated all of those lies, and even cited the Kaufman Commission for support, even though it said the exact opposite. It's shocking. That won the National Book Award. It was deemed the very best book of 1989. This is the world we're living in. The Pulitzer Prize, it only is given out to liberals. It never goes to conservatives. You can go down the list of the different books, or at least maybe occasionally there's a stray conservative book that slips through, but it's extremely unusual. The Oscars came out in early 2024 and said, I mean, everyone knew this for years, but they actually said from now on, we're going to look at the political theme of the plot line in determining who to give the award to. It was going on for years that way, but they finally just came right out and said it. And what a surprise, the Oscars lost about half their audience, and they can't understand why.
Maybe they should drink some more beer.
That might do it.
Because they learned the hard way. But here's the thing, is that it's just so amazing that they get away with this lies upon lies. But most people, and by the way, the numbers are changing. I think most Democrats, majority of them no longer support Israel the way they did in years past. I would say most people don't understand the complexities of what's going on in Israel and with the Palestinians and with Hamas. But yet, why do they choose to believe the Palestinian narrative when, if you do a little research, not a lot, a little bit, you'll say, hey, there's something really going on here. And they massacred Jews, the worst case of killing Jews since the Holocaust. They raped. Brutality was so ugly. How could any normal person say, I like these people and I want to support them and I hate the people that they victimized?
Oh, it's because that's the power of cognitive dissonance. when you have a really, really deeply held belief, and then a fact appears that contradicts it, the way we humans are wired is you change the facts, not the belief. Now, this was described by actually a Jewish psychologist named Leon Festinger. He's considered one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century. And he wrote a book. It's called When Prophecy Fails. And it's about a woman named Dorothy Martin, who must have been incredibly charismatic because she managed to convince a community of people in Ohio that the world was going to come to an end on December the 25th, 1954. And she convinced them that a flying saucer was going to come and rescue them. People quit their jobs. They sold their possessions. They stood on the top of the hill with their suitcases, ready to be rescued by the flying saucer. And then, of course, it didn't happen. But when it didn't happen, people did not say, oh, my God, I made a mistake. They all came up with all sorts of crazy theories. Well, maybe we got the wrong date. Maybe we're on the wrong hill. In other words, people just couldn't come to grips with the fact that they just made a mistake. It has long been noted that cognitive dissonance is best suited and happens the most when it comes to government policy, because the two conditions for cognitive dissonance are, number one, people getting very invested in a set of beliefs, and number two, that there be a broad community of other like-minded people so that when it all turns out to be wrong, you can draw emotional support from others. Well, this is what politics is all about. This is how you end up in Vietnam for 10 years. This is how you end up in failed wars elsewhere. This is how King George III ended up losing the American Revolution. I mean, it was just self-evident that the whole thing was a mistake, but he kept doubling down and doubling down. That's the way government policy often works. And again, when your highest and most important value is fighting racism, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time finding all the nuances in the Arab-Israeli conflict. You're going to back the people of color.
Our guest is Ray Kaufman. He's starring. His newest book is called American Intifada, Israel, the Gaza War, and the New Anti-Semitism. We're discussing why liberals hate Israel, support Gaza, support Hamas, etc. But it's not only non-Jews. Unfortunately, we have a certain percentage of Jews who also pick up on that narrative. So why would somebody who's Jewish, and they call themselves, when they call themselves committed Jews, I'm not sure what they're committing. They're committing a crime probably against our nation. But why would they pick up this narrative when they know it's wrong, it's false? They see what happened. They see the terror. They see the killings. I'm sure they must have relatives who were exposed to what Hamas has been doing and the terrorists have been doing. Why would they be so anti-Israel, so pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian?
Well, the term I always love is when they call them as a Jews, because very often they say, well, as a Jew, I believe, and so on. I think it all gets back to the same thing. There's this new construct that they've invented called Tikkun Olam, and Tikkun Olam does technically mean fixing the world, but there is a concept of Tikkun Olam in the Talmud and the Gemara. It means actually something very different. This is a brand new construct, and what happened was a group of people, primarily in the Reform movement, came up with I can almost say a redefinition of Judaism as what turned out to be a bunch of liberal talking points. And they cast it and branded it Tikkun Olam. Now, I have to say, initially, when I heard about this, I thought it actually was not a bad idea. I'm kind of center-right myself, but if people want to believe in liberal beliefs, but at least have some sort of a Jewish identity, it struck me that this was a good thing. The problem was that because the most important, this Tikkun Olam is things like, defending the environment and, social justice as they define it. But the most important value among liberals today is fighting racism. So this Tikkun Olam, in effect, what it's done is it has created a construct of Judaism that in many cases demonizes the Jews, because again, the Jews are the perceived white group of privilege. The Palestinians are the people of color. And then the cognitive dissonance takes it from there. So, things like the fact that Israel has been in favor of a two-state, or Benjamin Netanyahu has been in favor of a two-state solution for 30 years, is forgotten. They try to cast him as this horrible person. The idea of the Arab invasion of 1948, legalizing the ethnic cleansing of Jews becomes, almost the Ten Commandments. And you end up with this truly bizarre outcome that there are Jews who are demonizing Jews.
By the way, the massacre of October 7th, the brutality of Hamas, is not the first time that you had these fundamentalist terrorists. In 1929 in Hebron, if you read the accounts, they burned, they killed, they chopped off people's heads. Exactly what happened in October 7th, they did in 1929. So we have to learn history in order to make sure it doesn't repeat itself. And unfortunately, a lot of our Jews don't even know what happened in 29, even what happened more recently. But there are also something called intersectionality, where on the left, I don't think it's on the right, but on the left, where if you embrace one cause, you got to embrace every cause. So if you're pro-gay or pro-grape pickers, whatever it might be, you also have to adapt and be anti-Israel. And for some reason, that leaves Jews out. Some of them feel uncomfortable. Some of them say, you know what? I want to be part of this group, so I'm going to oppose the whole agenda. I'll work with the whole agenda.
Well, intersectionality isn't really intersectionality, because if they really believed that, gay rights should be in the mix, they would be backing Israel, not the Palestinians. Gays have been serving openly in Israel's military since at least the 1980s. I could go on and on and on. Israel appears at the top of the gay travel sites as one of the most friendly places in the world.
I think they should change it to Gaza or maybe
Well,
Iran.
Yeah, there you go.
They got their priorities mixed up.
Yeah, one guy referred to Tel Aviv as a gay Mecca, and I thought to myself, this guy obviously does not know how many openly gay people there are in Mecca. But anyway, what it really comes down to is judging people by the color of their skin and not the content of their character. And while you're on the topic of history, let me give you a few little fun facts that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people have heard of the fact that way back in 1940, the British came out with something called the White Paper, where they said they broke every promise they'd made in the Balfour Declaration, the mandate. They said no Jewish state, no more Jewish immigration, maybe 75,000 more, no more after that. Jews can no longer buy land. There will only be an Arab-Palestinian state. The Jews will be a minority. What most people don't know is the Palestinians rejected that. That wasn't good enough for them. Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was then the leader of the Palestinians, said, leave the Jews as a minority. We're not going to leave them as a minority. We're going to kill them. We're going to commit genocide. We're going to kill every baby in the crib. And then he went to Germany. He sided with Hitler. He sent his nephew on a fact-finding mission to all the death camps to find the most efficient way to do it. In 1944, they sent something called Operation Atlas, a mission to poison the water supply of Tel Aviv to murder all 150,000 Jews. It failed. The guy who planned it was a guy by the name of Ahmed Salameh, was the father of Ali Hassan Salameh, who plotted the Munich massacre in 1972. So the Palestinian view, long before there was a refugee, long before there was a Jewish state, was to commit genocide. And most Palestinians today will tell you they did the right thing. This is the core problem. This is who these people are supporting.
Now, I know you focus on the left and the liberals and why they hate Israel and why they focus on Gaza, but we're seeing on the right an alarming pace of anti-Semitism. So I know the left is dangerous and they've been going at it for a long time, and the right has been better, but it seems like it's getting a lot worse on the right, and they're pretty much agree. The rhetoric you hear on the right sounds almost like it came from the left.
So I got to respectfully disagree on that. We're seeing it on the right in social media, but we're not yet seeing it in the polling. So we're seeing it in
the amount of Republicans who support Israel has gone down. Not as bad as
I
the
didn't see
Democrats.
that one. So maybe you saw a poll I didn't see. I'm seeing that the polling at least still looks pretty solid. You do have some,
especially among the young people, 20 and 30-year-old range, especially among that group. And by the way, the Christian evangelicals, the new generation, the younger ones, are supporting Palestinians.
You saw polls
I spoke to pastors about it.
Oh,
it's a fact.
It could well be. All I can say is, on the right, it's paleo, what I call paleo anti-Semitism. It's just hardcore hatred of Jews. It's people like, well, if you want to go back enough in time, Patrick Buchanan, who, as Alan Dershowitz pointed out, was always in favor of maximum penalties for criminals unless they were Nazi war criminals. And then he found his inner liberal. People like Candace Owens, people like Tucker Carlson. Okay, that's just an old phenomenon. When I wrote this book, I was trying to describe something a little different, a particular kind of anti-Semitism where you have mainstream people and people who really should know better, who are just consistently saying things that are crazy and just trying to understand that. Now, on the left, you've got hardcore haters and anti-Semites as well. I'm not saying that there are not people like that. By the way, Jimmy Carter might well have been one of them. Though we don't have it on tape, a lot of people said that when Jimmy Carter went back home, he became a pastor, and every week he would give a sermon. More than one person has said he said that the Jews killed Christ. So he might have been just a hardcore hater also. I don't really know, but I was trying to describe kind of a more mainstream, people who should know better type of anti-Semitism, and I think it's driven by cognitive dissonance.
Well, Jimmy Carter should have known better. He was the president of the United States, and he listened. He made peace. He even said nice things about Trump and other people that he ordinarily didn't. But the point is, though, is that at the end of the day, when he came to Israel, he didn't back down. By the way, Mamdani, as quoted by the New York Times, the mayor-elect of New York, he said he compromised on everything. The one thing he won't compromise is Palestine.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it said. With respect to Jimmy Carter, you're right on the money. He made his peace with Ronald Reagan. He made his peace even a few kind words for Donald Trump. The only thing that remained an obsessive hatred for him, and you can use the word hatred, was Israel. He once said in an interview with Chris Matthews that the genocide, as he termed it, perpetrated by Israel was even worse than what had happened in Rwanda. In Rwanda, like 1 million people got killed. I mean, take every Arab-Israeli conflict put together up to that point. This was like in the early 2000s. I don't even think 10,000 people had died between Israel and the Palestinians, that is. So, I mean, it's just nonsensical things like that repeated over and over again.
Well, listen, even now when the ceasefire was declared and all of a sudden Hamas came out from on the underground and they were killing their rivals, they killed hundreds of people in a brutal fashion. Where were the people saying innocent lives are being lost? The Gazans are facing, terrible situation. I don't recall the New York Times or anybody else bemoaning the fact that Hamas was killing their own people.
Oh, that's absolutely the case. But their response to that would be, well, we don't judge Israel the same way we judge Hamas. And I agree with that. But here's the real...
I agree with that. Do you judge Israel should be judged differently?
Than Hamas, absolutely. But
no, I'm saying Hamas is killing people. They don't say a word about it. But when Israel's defending itself, they make a big to-do.
My point is it's even worse than that, because there's no double standard. There's a triple standard. There's a standard applied to the Arabs, which is no standard at all. It's the law of the jungle. The standard applied to America, to Barack Obama, and then that special set of rules applied to Israel, only Israel, no one but Israel. Here's something most people don't know. The U.S. Law of War Army Manual says, black on white, section 5.20, starvation is a legitimate method of warfare. That's a quote. Those are not just words on a page. That is policy. Forget what we did in World War II. When Barack Obama launched the war against ISIS in 2014, it's called Operation Inherent Resolve. And just to remind people, America supplied 70% of the air power, Britain 20%, France, Canada, and Australia the last 10%. So you have a perfect statement of all the good enlightened countries of the world. We didn't supply any humanitarian assistance. Barack Obama starved them out. There was, and I could say David Cameron, who was sharply critical of Israel. There was a siege of Fallujah in April of 2016, reported on by the Huffington Post. Again, the New York Times paid no attention to it, but the Huff Post, which takes pride in reporting on things others ignore, reported that 140 people had already been starved to death. The rest of the city was making soup out of grass. They put the question to Josh Earnest, Obama's White House spokesman. He didn't deny it. He said, look, it's really hard in a war. We're doing our best. They asked military officials, why didn't they parachute in humanitarian supplies? They said, because ISIS will get it. We don't want that. So Obama starves cities into submission. It's legal, moral, ethical, proportional. Netanyahu supplies 2 million tons of food. That's genocide. I mean, how can this be? It's insanity.
Double standard. But then again, UNRWA, which is one of my pet peeves, it should be dismantled. The only reason they're the only conflict in the whole world where you still have refugees still being refugees. After every conflict, the United Nations mandate is to make sure they're absorbed in some of the countries. Only exception is Palestinian refugees. UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Welfare Association, I believe that's what the A stands for. They perpetuate that refugee status. Again, they treat them on a different level. They actually, UNRWA fought against Israel in 1967, and it's helped Hamas throughout the years as well.
It's even worse than that. And this is something I've been saying for a while. UNRWA, I believe the United Nations has commit war crimes. Okay, there is no international law that says you have to supply your enemies in the middle of a war. And Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu are literally the only ones in the history of the world supplying their enemies in the middle of the war with food, water, even fuel. I mean, who gives fuel to their enemy in the middle of a war? Israel did it on humanitarian grounds. And again, the ICC wants to arrest Netanyahu for genocide. But here's where it gets crazy. Netanyahu supplied the food to Gaza. To the extent that there was hunger inside Gaza, it was because the United Nations refused to distribute it. Because when there was that moment when they had the GHF, which actually closed operations today, what they were trying to do was distribute food outside and away from Hamas so that Hamas couldn't get hold of it and use it to stay in power. Okay, so the UN said, well, we're not going to cooperate because UNRWA is basically an arm of Hamas. And the UN said, well, if UNRWA is not distributing the food, we will not distribute food. Now stop and think about this. To the extent that there's hunger, it's because the UN wouldn't distribute the food. So who's the war criminal? Netanyahu, who gave the food to Gaza, or Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, who refused to distribute it? Why is this man not under investigation? If there's going to be lawfare, let there be lawfare. If people are going to be investigated for war crimes, for starvation, shouldn't that be done to the UN, which again is a humanitarian organization? So Netanyahu would have been perfectly within his right to say, I'm not going to supply my enemy in a war. The UN, as a humanitarian organization, had an obligation to distribute it, yet refused to do so. Why are they not under investigation?
A good question. In the few moments that we have remaining, here, the fascinating part, there's a ceasefire going on right now, and yet you still have some violent demonstrations. We saw it at front of the Park East Synagogue the other week. You still have the criticism of Israel. They're still banning Israeli professors. They're banning his Jews. The anti-Semitism is increasing. You would think that when the conflict ceases or goes to a low point where there's officially no hostilities going on, there's no active fighting on a day-to-day basis, the world hasn't changed. The liberals are still attacking Israel as if the war was going full force.
Yeah, we haven't seen any easing whatsoever.
No.
Going full force. I think it's going to continue to go full force. What can you say? They have an issue. They're not going to let it go so quickly. But luckily, we've got the right president in the White House, and hopefully they can turn it into something better for tomorrow.
As long as these liberals are out there agitating, I'm not sure, because they're well. Here's the difference now, is that they're well funded. The George Soros, you have even Chinese bots have been attacking Israel, and Russian bots have been attacking Israel by the millions. So you have a whole army, especially online, that's continuing the war against Israel.
Yeah, the great British professor Neil Ferguson, great historian, made that point early on in the war. He said, look, I've been involved in academia my whole life. Nothing in academia works spontaneously in such a coordinated fashion that immediately after the attack, the 7 elite universities, Harvard, Yale, Penn, all spontaneously protested Israel's, genocide. This is before the troops even went into Gaza, and everybody was handed out a tent, and the tents all looked the same. I mean, it was pretty obvious it was some sort of a coordinated effort. It might be with Qatari cash. It might be somebody else's cash. It's a sad comment.
Iran also has been very helpful to anti-Israel groups on campus. They boasted about it.
That's correct. The supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, praised the protesters and said they were on the right side of history. Now, when Ali Khamenei is praising what you're doing, it means you ought to think twice about what you're doing.
No, I think they actually said that they were sponsoring it.
I remember that, but you know what? I could believe it. I mean,
I believe that also Hamas was very well aware of what was going on the campuses too. So everything was coordinated. Are you an optimist or pessimistic regarding the liberals and the Jews? Are we ever going to see a correction where they're going to come back to their senses, or we're with this for a long time to come?
Very, very optimistic. I am a very.
On what basis?
On the basis of, I know these are not dumb people. These are smart people in many cases. I don't necessarily agree with them on everything, but I know that there's not for long will people judge others by the color of their skin, not the content of their character. I've had many instances where I've spoken to people. All you need is a simple thought experiment. And then a lot of the time they'll just say, oh, I never thought of it that way. I'll give you just another quick one, the Iran deal. Okay, you've got crazy ayatollahs. They say Jews are apes and pigs. They're going to kill all the Jews. They got a clock ticking in Tehran to when they're going to do it. And now we have an Iran deal that says they get to keep the first generation centrifuges, continue the research, continue to figure out how to weaponize, take the nuclear fissile material, put it on a missile, which everyone says is the hardest part. They get to make arms in 5 years, missiles in 8, enrich uranium in 10. In 15 years, it all sunsets. The experts say the breakout period will probably be no more than a few months. And along the way, they get over $100 billion to pay for insurgencies. Okay, imagine if it was really a white supremacist regime that wants to kill all the black people. Do you really think Obama would have agreed to an Iran deal with?
Why did it? Obama was a liberal, super liberal, very anti-Israel. Why do you suppose that he went along with this when he should have known better? Because he was intelligent. He had all the reports. He knew who Iran was, and yet still allowed this. Why?
2 words: cognitive dissonance. Again, if
it has to be more than that.
If it was a white supremacist regime wanting to kill all the blacks, he never would have agreed to that deal. They get to make weapons, do research, get $100 billion, fund insurgency. But they're people of color and they're fighting the Jews, a perceived white group of privilege. Now it's not so clear. Now they talk about the 1953 coup. Maybe that's why they hate us. It's nonsense, by the way. The Ayatollahs backed the 1953 coup. I'm not defending what Eisenhower did. We never should have engaged in a coup and meddle in other countries' politics. But the Ayatollahs backed it also for the same reason we did. They didn't want to see a communist running Iran any more than we did. They hate us for other reasons. But again, it's easy to come up with explanations and rationalizations.
Well, the Ayatollahs and the Shiites, they hate us because we're infidels. They hate Christians, they hate Jews, they hate Sunnis, and they really go to war against all of them. And they view Israel as the little Satan, America as the great Satan. Nothing to do with 1953 has to do with their worldview of Islam, and they want to establish their leadership throughout the whole world. They want the whole world to become Islamic under their rule.
Correct. They want to conquer Mecca. And the Ayatollah Khomeini said this. It wasn't like it was a secret. This is why Iran is right now dying a slow death. It's because, if I said to you, what is the purpose of government? You'd say the purpose of government, it's to improve the lives of the citizenry. And then you might say, was that a trick question? I mean, isn't that obvious? To them, it's not obvious. Ayatollah Khomeini famously said the revolution was not about the price of watermelons. And what he meant by that was, growing the economy, educating the kids. That's not important.
That's not his agenda.
His agenda is conquering Mecca,
the world,
and killing the infidels and reestablishing a caliphate. That to the exclusion of everything else. And that is why there's no water in the capital. They have running blackouts, and they're still sending billions to Hezbollah, billions to the Houthis, and billions to Hamas, because that's the most important thing to them. That is what people don't understand. And that, by the way, is why radical Islamic government always fails.
Uri Kaufman, thank you for joining us, the author of American Intifada, Israel, the Gaza War, and the New Anti-Semitism Must Reading. What's your next book going to be about? I'm
doing a book now about the Hanukkah revolt. No one has done one. It's shocking to me.
About the Maccabees?
Yeah, the Maccabees. Just a simple narrative history. What happened? Who were they?
You're gonna beat Mel Gibson, who was going to make a movie about it.
Was he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, when the whole anti-Semitism thing about his movie came out, so he's afterwards he said he's going to make a movie about Hanukkah, about the Maccabees, but it never happened.
Never happened. Well, he would have been rooting for the Greeks anyway.
Probably. Anyway, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.